Hello and good afternoon here from Eindhoven. I am still struggling to find a good introduction, and it is still awkward for me. I'm still trying to figure out what would be a really good introduction. Feels like a radio introduction so far, but welcome to Vasl. We are going to be discussing Nuance today with my co-host Mudassir. Mudassir, why don't you, before we get into the topic, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience, because you are going to be part of this journey, hopefully for the longer term.
My introduction doesn't really go well with your the purpose you're trying to serve, but sure. I think more than anything else, I just think that we bond with each other in the intellectual capacity. So I think that is what forms the reasons to start this podcast. But otherwise, I'm an entrepreneur, still struggling to find things out in this economy, trying to reevaluate my goals. But for the most part, you can just see me as an entrepreneur. So I think that should do for now.
Yes, Mudassir is calling us in from Pakistan, and as he said, we usually have good discussions all the time, so we decided to move this towards more of a medium where we can consistently discuss interesting topics. The idea of Vasl always has been that we need to make difficult conversations easier, right? That is the idea that I try to live with. That's the idea I try to make happen with this podcast. So today we're going to be discussing another very difficult topic. We're going to be discussing nuance and the lack of it in society and how it is detrimental to society. So before we begin even with that aspect, let's discuss a little bit about nuance. So Mudassir, what are your thoughts on what is nuance?
You can take it with in different ways. Nuance can be in conversations. It can be in critical thinking in general. It's obviously a very vast topic, but for now, what I'm trying to get at is just taking things not in black and white, which as humans we tend to do. We tend to simplify and oversimplify at times. So the concept that nuance makes you think of multiple perspectives. And even if something is true, it doesn't mean that it has to be in an extreme. So that is what I'm trying to get at. But obviously, nuance can be in different forms.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Why I'm just butting in a little bit to discuss a little bit with you is to ask you a little bit about this question of black and white. So I personally believe simplicity is key, right? Like, I try to make my life as simple as possible. And I already want to start this conversation off with the aspect of nuance, that I get it, I understand the added value of it, but what about going too much into over nuance or something like that, right? So is it possible to do that before we even get into the problem of lack of nuance?
Yeah, of course. One thing that confines us as humans is the lack of time that we have. Sometimes over nuance kills the purpose in a way that, for example, if we talk about the coronavirus, there were fears that rushing into the vaccine could have been more dangerous than we think, because it's a vaccine that we're going to give to the whole world. And if there's something wrong in it, and if we take too much time with it, it's also dangerous. But if we rush it in, again, that's dangerous too. So obviously we need to find the sweet spot, but it doesn't mean that nuance doesn't stay important.
Indeed. I think this is a very, 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 very interesting part. So before even getting into the topic of lack of nuance, we already had a very, very interesting concept of incomplete information, right? So as humans, we always have incomplete information. And as my studies in economics always taught me, that you're always working with incomplete information. And you as humans, as rational creatures, we try to make sense of the world around us, given that we have incomplete information. So sometimes the cost of getting that information is not worth the value it gives, right? And that is what I think about when I think about nuance. So sometimes it's great if you start from very, very simple. It's understandable. It's okay that you need to go a little bit deeper and learn a little bit more so that you can have an informed opinion about the topic or whatever decision you're making. But then you slowly get into the concept of over-engineering, right? Or overthinking, because you're like, you know what? More information is great. There's nothing wrong with too much information. But the marginal effect of that slowly starts becoming less. And that's something I want to discuss with you further on. But before we get into the over-engineering part, I would like to start with what what is the lack of nuance, and if some examples so that the audience knows before we jump forward towards over engineering and over nuance.
I think my example would be ironic in a way because to explain things, I wanted to simplify it, but also that kind of gets the purpose of it. But yeah, I was trying to jog on to the examples that I can come with and something that can be relatable for everyone. So the best example I could come up with was using Google Maps. Whenever you're going straight and you find a bridge that's right in front of you, there are two options. Rather than like you can take the bridge or you can go from the normal road. So unless the map specifically tells you to take the bridge or not, you constantly have this like annoyance that you have to figure it out with whether you have to take the bridge or not. So like that, the simple thing that you have to know, okay, I mean, you're going to go straight either way, but you have to know, okay, which straight do you have to take? So if you bring in nuance, like the developer who's making the app or who's designing it up for you, if they consider that, then like they're making life simpler for you. So over there, you do understand what nuance is, but like this is something I fail to understand or like struggle to come in terms with, that people in general just try to move away from it. Although like in general in their life, they're going for more nuanced takes in other aspects, but they ignore it in others. So like I think that is the best example I could come up.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very nice example. And I think it already starts the conversation of why people avoid nuance, right? So you already mentioned at the end a little bit about why people are so nuanced, maybe in the products they're buying. So, for example, my wife is very, very interested in, right now we're about to have a baby. So I'm looking at reviews after reviews after reviews of baby processors or stuff like that. And she wants to look at it pinch by pinch, right? She's like, tell me every single review and what is good was. That's a very, very nuanced take. But again, we go into over nuance there. But when I want to discuss something about whether like in terms of morality or philosophy or something that really gives me energy, like political discussions that, okay, what is right, what is wrong, then she just goes like, it doesn't matter to me. It's not worth it. So what I've come to realize is that a lot of people do not think there is any added value in thinking about these things. That's why the nuance is missing, because they're like, doesn't really matter. Like in the end, the politics is going to politics and I'm going to do me. So what value am I adding by having an informed opinion about this? So what is your take on that?
I think that has more to do with planning, I guess. Sometimes we just jump on and researching about things rather than trying to figure it out, like taking a step back and trying to understand why are we doing it in the first place. If we do that about things, I think we'll be focused on particular things, and then if we go into detail and then if we take the nuanced opinion, I think that would be fine. So I think it has more to do with just planning and not being simple, like not simplifying it, or the debate between over engineering or over nuance, as you said. I think it's about that.
Yeah, I think so as well. But I still have this question that I would like you to tell me a little bit more about. People have so much that they're juggling with, right, in life. And they are not interested in sometimes certain takes. It is quite normal for everyone to not have the same opinion or same interest in things, right? Like politics, for example. I want to argue, and this is something I've been arguing on my newsletters as well, is that we have a duty to democracy to have an informed opinion, right? As a citizen. But a lot of people disagree with it. They're like, that's not my job is to pay taxes, to not commit crimes, and be a nice person and a human. And that's, in essence, if I need to care about democracy or I need to go into that aspect, then I need to go into politics. For them, it's, again, a very black and white thing, right? They're like, you know what? I want to focus on my life. And I'm already wearing so many hats. I'm wearing the hat of a family man. I'm wearing a hat of an employee. I'm wearing a hat of a citizen. It's too much for me to handle. So you can imagine there's decision paralysis. So how do you deal with it? How do you tell people that, no, it is your duty and it is not as difficult as you think?
I think we need to understand that one of the things that we've been told for so many years, in fact, decades by now, is that like we've made politics such an ugly thing that just thinking about it and just having conversations about it is frowned upon in a lot of places. So I think obviously like there are other aspects to this as well, because it's complicated. You need to know something about the law. You need to know something about like knowing different things, you just to get into the conversation, you have to know different things. So there are prerequisites in one. So I do sympathize with them in a way, but I also think that we need to tell these people why having conversations about it is important. Because everything that you do, the taxes that you pay, the lives that you live, is being directly impacted by the constitution and the people who make those, like the parliamentarian who is responsible for aligning this up and making laws for you. So if you do get into these conversations, it is going to help you directly. Obviously, these processes are slower than we think, but if we think of it from a more broader perspective, because it's not just going to impact you, it's going to impact the generations after you. It is going to impact your children, the children's after it. So I think if we can make people have the broader view, it would be really helpful for the society and them, like themselves too.
Yeah, I think it is very difficult for people to be far-sighted, right? It's like short-sightedness is a human element. We were never supposed to think this far, especially in terms of civilizations, right? So it is very difficult to convince people that, hey, okay, you're going to be making these discussions and conversations for the children that are coming after. You're already having this struggle with environmentalism, right? So politics and diplomacy and democracy aside, environmentalism is a proven fact, right? Like the climate change that is happening. And we know that 100 years from now, this planet will become inhabitable. We know that. But yet, most of us are not willing to change. Because most of us do not really care about 100 years down the line. They're like, oh, we don't even know those children of our children that we're going to be living in this world because we don't care enough. So this evolutionary feature, and it is a feature, not a bug, right? Because we were not supposed to live past 30, supposedly, right? Because from an evolutionary point of view, what were you supposed to do? You're supposed to be a caveman, a cavewoman, have children, and then nurture the child till it becomes self-sustaining. Once the child becomes self-sustaining, you are extinct for evolution. They don't care about you anymore because you propagated the species your job is in. That's why we had a lot of early diseases as well, because we were not supposed to live this long. And now we are living this long and our body is not capable for it. So the same argument I'll try to make here, that we are not mentally supposed to be thinking this much till an extent, is an argument that we're not supposed to be having so many hats because we're not supposed to care this much. So what is your take on that? Do you think that is true? Do you think there's a way that we can make this work?
I think this would have been a more sensible conversation had we not made civilization and societies in general. Now that the laws exist, now that we are living in a civilized society per se, but yeah. So at this point, I think it's too late to be having the conversation whether to think about it or not. If we want to live this way, then I think we'll have to figure out a way to counter this, if we are to counter it. So I think like we have to do that in any way. But I think the main problem lies where we didn't evolve together. Like, I mean, as a human being, as a species, we did evolve, but like people who were gaining knowledge, who had access to more resources, were far ahead of most, like the rest of the population. So like 90% of the world is still like far behind the rest of the 10% because they had more access to resources, they got better education. So they know why it's important to have this education and to maybe understand all these things, politics and stuff like that. But because such a huge majority is still far behind, they have this like, I think that is where this populist culture and just populism in culture is brewing. Because there's such a huge amount of people that has been ignored for such a long time. And then again, like in order to attract them, what politicians and these populists have to do is just make things attractive for them. And making attractive isn't a hard job. They just have to make things black and white. They have to show them that they're the victims, and they are in a sense, even if the reasons are different. So that's a huge reason why they're being misguided. And that is how the populist culture is.
Yeah, well, I agree with you to an extent, because the counter argument that I have for this is, why is populism then in the 10%? Because you have populism rising in the 10% as well, right? In the countries which are rich, in the countries which are educated, you still have rise of populism in the countries like the Netherlands, countries like France, countries like the US, Britain. So if I were to take what you're saying, that no, if you're educated, if the society is educated enough and they understand the importance of democracy and the civic duty that comes with it, then you would expect them to be a bit more involved, but they aren't. The youth especially just do not care. They care more about okay, you should not offend anybody, you should not try to disparage somebody, but that's the essence of what you need to be doing. The rest of it, again, we don't care. We care about the public space, but we don't really care about the political space. And how do you feel about that? Or do you think there's nothing there?
Yeah, sure. There is a chunk of population that has access to resources and still has a problem with it. I do agree with that. But I think that also has a lot to do with the overall culture in general. And I think a huge factor in this is the economy in general. Like, as we're moving closer and closer to recession throughout the world, and people are struggling to have their ends meet. Like, I would quote the example of Britain right now. The majority of people who voted against being part of the EU were the elderly. And again, even though a lot of them might have had access to good education and resources, they still weren't as ahead as this generation was, because there's a clear difference. We have access to everything on our phones. We have access to everything through the internet and schools in general. So we're moving far faster than they were. So I think that has an aspect to play with it. And then again, because of the huge immigrations and how these countries are totally different from what they used to be, so I think that also added to it. So they were feeling more alienated as they were growing up, and they feared that things would be completely different from what they saw as they were growing up. So I think there's this feeling of alienation that is also causing it. And then obviously coupled with the poor economic conditions, that just adds to it.
Yeah, I think there is something that we can unpack there, especially because of how we're discussing about people, even in educated classes, missing out on certain details, right? So with Brexit, as you said, a lot of elderly voted for Brexit, but also a lot of people voted for Brexit, which in hindsight, they said that they were fed the wrong information, right?
Yeah.
They were like in Ireland or in certain villages in Ireland, they said that they were being shown very ridiculous stats that, okay, more than 80% of people in the UK are immigrants or something like that. And because of that, they voted against EU for the EU integration. And that is a very good segue into the concept of nuance in the digital age. So we understand that nuance is difficult to begin with, right? Back in the day when the information did not travel fast, you still had nuanced opinions in coffee shops, in parliaments and those kind of places, again, in the upper echelons of society. And the lower echelons of society did not have access to it, which is wrong in its sense. But also, I would argue that there is a bit of a structure there, right? Right now, the problem with democratization of the free speech is that now everyone has an opinion, no matter how unnuanced it is. And because of the platform that they have, they can bring about a following which can follow them blindly and cause more going down to their echo chambers or going down to their rabbit holes of this unnuanced opinion. So how do we deal with this? What do you think you can equip people with in trying to navigate the digital age in terms of nuance?
I think that is a very good example in the sense that you talked about over-nuanced previously. So I was actually thinking about it because now that we're entering into this digital age, there's this post-truth era where you have so many truths on the internet, like so many versions of the same story, that it's hard to come up with what is the right one. So what happens is that the version that you believe in more, you get ads about it, because the internet feeds you the information again and again. So what happens is there are so many versions of truth and everyone has their own beliefs in it. So I do understand where you're coming from, but I think I would disagree to the point where restricting the access isn't the way. I think giving more access and just making sure that they don't get the information only they want to see should be our goal right now. Rather than, I understand the point that when you restrict these information and you have to struggle to get to the positions, like you said, you have to go to libraries, you have to go into these circles where you will be in the company of intellectuals. I understand where you're coming from, but again, restricting that hasn't aged very well for us, because the point I already made, that there is such a huge population who doesn't know things, who doesn't have access to education, that just furthers the problems that we're already facing. I think we need to find ways that we can give as much data as we possibly can, so that they have they can have the nuanced take that we ideally want them to have. How we're going to do it is obviously open for question, and everyone would have their own opinions on it. I would love to know what you think about it, and do you think that can be solved or not?
So I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you a little bit, but I want to take the conversation on that side, right? I want to talk about this issue with restricting information and trying to make people, the general audience, not have all the information. Well, I have a counter on that, because I sincerely believe that too much information is also a problem, right? And information not analyzed or absorbed correctly by the right audience is also an issue. You see with all the pseudoscience that's going on, you see with all conspiracy theories and populism that goes away. You argue that populism is true till an extent, right? Those people are victims till an extent, and they try to murk it around a little bit. But in certain cases, it's also not true. Like immigrants are taking our jobs and those kind of things. If you look at the data, it doesn't hold true till an extent unless you slice it in a way that it shows you the truth. And that's what I mean. Those tools to make it happen, those tools that people possess are not there yet. So am I wrong for saying that some people should not have that much information at hand to become too blinded by the decision paralysis?
I think it's a very idealistic scenario. I think the perfect example, if someone is, if our audience is aware with what's going on in Pakistan, they might also know that there has been a lot of restriction on the kind of information they're allowed to give. By the law, PEMRA is supposed to be an independent institution operating under the government, but clearly it doesn't. And right now there's a clear restriction on PTI and Imran Khan's narrative. And as we stand, as I speak right now, at the time of recording, they're not allowed to take Imran Khan's name. And regardless of which side you're on, whether you support him or not, I think if you are listening to this podcast, I think the average listener would say, okay, this stopping on freedom of speech is not helpful for anyone. Again, there is someone who's deciding it, and the debate will always say that the people who are in power and who are deciding it are not doing in the best of faith. So again, it's in an idealistic scenario that might work, but in most cases it wouldn't, because it's very hard to decide who gets to have that power.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, and I do agree with it. But as I took the conversation back from Pakistan to our previous one about educated countries like the US still having populism in it, right? So these are educated people, but they are also making the wrong decisions. They do possess the skills and the knowledge to discern the truth. They're like, okay, you know what? I have the skills. I did high school. Maybe I didn't do more than high school, but I did high school. But then the question is, maybe nuance is not something that they teach in academic education, right? And that is my main concern. Mainly what I'm worried about is I do not want to take people's right to freedom of speech away, but I do want the people to have a right only if they qualify for the right? Like how you be a citizen or you're a human, so you qualify for this right of human rights, right? So to qualify to be a citizen of a country, you need to possess some things. And I think critical thinking and the ability to do these things should be part of that procedure, that civil procedure, so that you can become a good, nuanced member of society, rather than being just a cog in a machine that people of power take advantage of.
I think, again, the problem, again, falls into who gets to decide that. And there have been, even in the educated societies, like the Donald Trump speeches were banned. And what happens as a result is, again, they start considering themselves as victims. And as a result, this populist mindset rises rather than falling. So I think we, in an idealistic scenario, we might think of a solution where the people in power have the right intentions and they make sure the greater good of the people is priority. Maybe, in an ideal world, there is a method that we know what the pros and cons of every single thing, and then we can maybe weigh them out and know which information is helpful for what percentage of the population. But doing so requires a lot of effort, and even then, it would still be pseudoscience. Like, there will be arguments against it, and I don't think you can get the majority of the population to agree on that method. I think the problem will still exist.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, and this is what I'm thinking about. This is what really confuses me these days. Is there a better system or a better way that we can think about this? Because for me, the biggest question is that how do we come to an idealistic society where everyone is mature enough and informed enough to be able to make nuanced decisions? Because our topic is how to build a nuanced society, right? And how the lack of it is disrupting society in general. So if we cannot think about ideals, or if we cannot think about ideas, then I feel like we're not doing the job. So I might be thinking too idealistically, but what suggestions could you think of that you think would be a better way for us to at least move towards that idealistic society?
I think a big part of it is, for example, if you take the religious side of things, there are a lot of taboos. There's the risk of blasphemy, the risk of offending people is always there. And even if you're talking beyond that, you're talking about normal politics and the societal issues in general, people tend to get offended pretty soon. But in a society, again, I would prefer a society where the information is so common that an average citizen has the pros and cons and just information in general to decide that. When you have so much information about all sides of the story, it becomes less evil, I guess. If you keep hearing all sides of the story, again, I know the problem will still exist because the right-wing side of things, and even the far left, I think they tend to oversimplify things, and there's a problem that exists. But if we can make sure that every single person has a lot of information, the conversation would flow on in which, like, even what we're doing right now, we're having a conversation. I mean, we do have similar views, but if we can make sure that we can attract both sides of the, like, people who might not agree with our views, but we have conversation that attract every side of the story. So, I mean, that would be one way to make people have more nuance in their opinions.
Yeah, I understand. And this reminds me of a very good book by Bosio. It's called Good Arguments. I just finished reading it like last month. And in this, he was making this case, right, that we need to learn to have nuanced opinions so we can have good arguments. And he was a debater in Harvard, and he thought debating is a thing that shouldn't be public good, like it was back in the days, right? And now it's not a public good; it's just shunned away. Even in universities, it's a very small part. So the reason I'm telling this story is because at the end, he asked this question to his Silicon Valley friend, that how do I make debating attractive to a non-interested person? And he always said that, okay, how can you scale it? Think scaling. You know, the Silicon Valley mindset, right? It's all about scaling. And he thought about scaling. But then he ended the book with a very nice paraphrased idea. He said that the essence of debating is in that individual, right? Because it's your thoughts, your beliefs, and you can never scale it. It is one by one, one-on-one, and you keep doing that one-on-ones till the whole society becomes that homogenous thing that turns one-on-one. And that is what we're doing here, right? We are doing this one-on-one because we know that we're going to be able to hear each other out. But it is a fact that other people will not be willing to put in that much effort or have that much patience to take in all of that information before making a decision. And on top of that, be okay with taking in all of that information and playing their part as a citizen, as I mentioned before, right? And that is why I have this discussion of, okay, we work in two ways, right? We put in our work and we do it ourselves, or we outsource the work to someone else. And that is, in essence, what people do. They outsource the thinking to politicians. And they outsource the news to journalists, right? So they expect everyone else to be informed enough that they don't need to be informed. And that is a very human mindset that we cannot change, no matter how much we want to change. You and I might be the select few in people who want to have these discussions, because a lot of people do not prefer having these discussions. They do not, and that is not me saying that, okay, we're good or we're better. No, it's just that for us, this gives us energy. For a lot of other people, it doesn't give them energy. And why waste energy on something you don't like? So bringing the conversation a whole, this is my question again, is how do you convince a species that is evolutionarily lazy to put in more effort to build a society? And I know your argument you made before that, okay, this is not a conversation to have now, Ahad. This was a conversation you need to have before when we read society was born, but society was born out of fluke as well, right? Like how fossil fuels and all of that industrialization was also out of fluke, and now we're realizing the repercussions of it. So maybe now we're realizing the repercussions of a nuanced society, that it will not exist. It cannot exist, maybe. So how do we deal with that?
I think on an individual level, what you can do is do the small bits. I listened to this very good example. He's again a podcaster that I generally follow and like. What he said was treat things as a monster. Again, if you're on the left side of the spectrum, you can treat, for example, if we're talking about climate change, so doing your part, treat it as a monster. What you can do is throw even like a small piece of stone, a pebble on it. But as a whole, as a society, when you do that, defeating that monster becomes easier. So what you do is you have conversation across the aisle. For example, something that I keep telling you for Vasl as well, which is that you should go where the audience is, regardless of the mode of conversation. Like if you're talking about social media, you should go to Instagram, TikTok, and wherever the audience, and have conversation across the aisle. If someone disagrees with you, go ahead, have a conversation. You don't have to agree with each other, but at least that way you're taking that person's audience and giving them a point of view that they might not be used to, or that might be alien to them. If you just manage to take the conversation across the aisle, I think you do make a huge, take a huge step towards a better society. I know the path seems very far away, the destination seems far away, but I think the best you can do is do your part.
This is a difficult point for me. You know why? Because we just had this conversation before we were starting this recording, right? That you're wasting water because I was taking a long shower, right? Or because I drive electric, for example. So I was compensating. So this might be a bit of a digression, but I think it's really important to the topic of nuance. I really feel on an individual level, you're not going to make a difference in these things, what you talked about. Not at societal conversations, but in terms of having an impact. Because throwing that pebble on a monster, you can get 8 million people to throw a pebble on that monster, and the impact on that monster would be similar as if one company just throws a monster rock on that monster, right? Yeah. And that is in essence where I diverge the responsibility in the world of in this world of freedom that we live, right? With democratization everywhere and the individual being held responsible for everything. We're forgetting how societies always functioned. An evolutionary part of us, which was we always lived in tribes where they were small, so they were democratic. But because society started growing, democracy naturally felt a bit more difficult, because to take everyone's opinion in a decision would become unreasonable. And I mean that very, very selectively, because it is very difficult to get everyone on the same page, because not everyone cares about the same thing. Even take climate change, for example. Even within climate change, you have people who are like, you know what, no, get nuclear power. They're like, no, don't get nuclear power. Nuclear reactors are not the way. Get renewable, waters and solar. They all have the same goal, but even in that goal, they have differences. So what I'm trying to say is that you need to hold institutions responsible rather than holding the individual responsible. As you said, right? Pembra is not allowed by someone to not talk about Imran Khan. And that is the problem. Those institutions should be thinking for the people, especially in their public goods, not private goods. Their responsibility is to inform their audience correctly and guide the audience in the right way, because that's what the audience demands from them, right? As a taxpayer in this country, I expect the roads to be nice, I expect the media to be unbiased, and I expect my children's education to be impartial, right? That's what I expect. If I don't expect that, why am I paying my money to this government? I should just do everything myself then. But that is not how society functions. And that is in essence my problem with this topic of individuality. And you know what? It starts with one conversation hour. It does. It really does. But you and I have had our share of, with our friend group of like 20 people, how difficult it is to get everyone engaged in one conversation. And this is 20 people.
I do think we managed to get our points across, which previously, I do think the people who were very rigid about it are more open to other opinions. Again, we can hold individuals and institutions accountable, but for that, I think the individual needs to have the information. Public at large, when they're aware, they'll make better choices. Whether it's holding these institutions accountable, whether it's holding politicians accountable. For that, I think they need the information. And again, it would come back to my own example, have conversations across the aisle. That's what you can do as an individual.
To wrap this up, I have another very interesting thing that I want to discuss with you. It falls under nuance because, again, so I understand the biggest difference between our conversation right now, our point of view, is that you do think the individual's impact is going to be higher, if I say correctly. And I think the institution's impact will be higher because the institution enables the individual, in my opinion. Now, to take the conversation to its end and to give you an example, there was this video that I sent you before, right? It was about how most leaders that are leaders of the world, most leaders, politicians, company, everything, mostly are narcissistic. How is that possible? That almost 80%, 70% of all leaders in any domain of life are psychologically verified narcissists. Because the system is built in a way that narcissists get to the top. It's built in a way that the person who talks the loudest, the person who eschews confidence, the person who gets shit done and is muscular and manly gets the top job. Because the system allows it. And when you fix the system, you fix the problem at top. And when you fix the problem at top, then that person can make the rightful decisions that you said that who gets to decide. The system gets to decide. And the system is not one person. That one person is a product of the system.
I completely understand your point, and I do understand that this requires a lot more time. This requires a more systematic change, and something like climate change, we do not have the time to fix that. I understand that, but what we can do is make system in a way, or alter system in a way that single individual, regardless of the position they're in, they don't have as much power as possible. So you keep hearing the leftists talk about the diffusion of power, so that the single person should have as little power as possible. Divide the power as much as you can. Provide provincial autonomy. Cities get autonomous. So in that way, like if you make the process of getting on top of the power cycle, you can impact it in a way by making it more complicated than it already is. I know it gets confusing for the individual, for an average individual, but that's your best bet. Make them less powerful and make the public at large more powerful. That is the best way we can do things.
And we do believe that through awareness, you do step in the right direction. I do believe that as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
But for me, the biggest question always is, okay, how much information is enough information? Because what I see the leftists always getting stuck in is this rabbit hole of the slippery slope problem, right? The problem where it's always whataboutery. It's always, okay, if this, then that, if this, then that. And because of that, they kind of lose sight of the end goal.
Yeah.
Good examples would be the cancel culture. Good examples would be the current LGBTQ programs that are going on. It's all fair. I'm all for it. But when you talk to them, some of them, you really forget. You see that they forget why they started this in the first place.
Yeah.
Representation was the goal. And now it's not representation. Now it's oppression. So like it's become something else completely in certain circles, not all of those circles. And I feel like awareness is the first step. And as society, we need to get there. But after that, I really think awareness is not the answer anymore. There needs to be a system overhaul in which you need to come up with a way that you empower the institutions to protect the people, because that's what they are for. An army protects their people, right? That's why we trust armies. But then you get armies such as which impose martial laws, or armies which control every aspect of your government and your country, but they still protect you in a way, supposedly, right? So that becomes a question. You want to say something?
You've put my life at risk. But yeah, I do understand your point. But again, like this conversation about the left going too far, again, this is a conversation probably for another day. And
Yeah.
we've had our share of this conversation.
Indeed.
But again, I do think even if you want to get the institutions accountable, you don't need to go in too much into the details of how to fix things. Just make sure everyone has the information they need to get to decide. Just this conversation that we just had, you had your own point of view, I did, and we probably don't totally agree with each other, but an average listener would know both sides of the story. So they can make their decision, they can make up their mind about what they want an ideal society to be like, but it's the information that counts. I would always be of the opinion that give as much information as possible, as long as you're not just misguiding them. But more information is always good enough.
Yeah, we have to end this conversation, or else I really had a really good counter to that. And I do want to say that counter out loud just so you can think about it, because I said that in the previous iteration as well, right?
If you just want your last word, don't you? You're using your powers as opposed to end the conversation.
Yes, indeed, I do. But no, I want you to end the conversation after my question, because after my statement, because I really feel this, because you're so adamant that you say that I think information is the answer. So that's why this analogy comes into my head that my coach said once. He said, if information was enough, then all of us would be rich, slim, and healthy, right? Because all of that information is online. How to save money, how to eat healthy, and how to exercise. All of that information is online for everyone to use. Yeah. But why do we have poverty till an extent, besides the institutional issue? Why do we have people who are obese? Why do we have health problems? Because information by itself isn't it. And that is my last word. But now I'll give you your last word.
I'd just say that sometimes this thing that people with, like, we kind of make this argument that if you give money to a poor guy, they'll probably use it for drugs or something that is not very useful. But the thing is, when you're in a very desperate situation, and even if you're not in a desperate situation, if given enough information, if it's something for, maybe it's just voting the right individual, I think that is something that can be drastically changed. And there are decisions that don't require like getting healthy or eating healthy, going to exercise regularly, does require different skills as well. But just using that information to good things, I think, is a lot more doable. I know, I completely understand your point of view that this process is much more tedious than we think it is, and maybe it could still fail. But I also believe that we as an individual can, like, the best way possible is to give more information rather than cutting people off it. The conversations right now should be more about getting information out there, because that's the thing that is missing right now. We already have too many powers that are trying to hold that information. So again, as much nuance as you can give, I think that would help the society.
No, all right. I think we'll end there. And just to prove it to you that I do not need the last word, I'm going to let you have that. And thank you so much, Anwar, Mudassir, for your time. I think this was wonderful. I had a lot of fun discussing this with you. I hope you did as well. For the rest, I hope you also enjoyed. I hope you left this after this podcast a bit more informed than when you joined in. So I really, really hope you all had some fun with us. This is Ahad signing off, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.